This program is presented by the Fromm Institute for Lifelong Learning at the University of San Francisco. The Fromm Institute, keeping up with the times no matter when.
At the very beginning of this course, 8 weeks ago, I asked you, does the culture out of which a religion grows have an effect upon that religion? And now I've given you some examples of the development of this religion. And as you recall, the origin society, the origin culture out of which Islam developed, was the Bedouin Arabic society of the Arabian Peninsula, a nomadic culture which by its very nature is necessarily tribal and necessarily prone to violence. It's also a merchant culture, by its very nature dependent upon negotiation, compromise, and contracts. And you will notice that in the life of Muhammad the Prophet, you see both of these elements very clearly. When he leaves Mecca to go to Medina, where he is now the Prince Prophet, you'll see that on the one hand, he incorporates violence initially in self-defense, and then in a more expansive concept of self-defense. And yet at the same time, through negotiations and contracts, engendered through trust, through common political and economic advantages, and through marriage, he again creates this enormous alliance that brings much of the Saudi Arabian island together under him. In other words, again, that he and then the religion that develops out of his teachings has a culture of violence and a culture of alliance. And both of them work hand in hand. In all honesty, I don't really want to answer this question for you. I'm just making these observations. I'm very happy to have you draw your own conclusions in this class, as you know. And I do find it, though I think we all do find it disturbing, the high casualty rate at the very beginning, that 3 out of the 4 caliphs are murdered, and that most of the Umayyad dynasty princes are murdered, and most of the Abbasid dynasty princes are murdered as well. But certainly one element to this also is that this religion, in the time period that we have been covering, it might be different next semester, but in this current time period, Islam is very attractive, it's very magnetic to nomadic peoples, of which there are many in these centuries. Do you see? In other words, it comes out of a nomadic culture, and it attracts nomadic cultures. And nomadic cultures, again, by their very nature, are violent and they are expansive. You may have seen in the New York Times, October 17, it didn't fit in then, but it fits in perfectly now, an article by Jeff Stein, "Can you tell a Sunni from a Shiite?" And you remember I said, I will guarantee you know the difference. It's really simple. It's really, really complicated, but it's really, really simple. Okay, so Jeff Stein writes as follows. Again, New York Times, this is about 2.5 weeks ago. "For the past several months, I've been wrapping up lengthy interviews with Washington counterterrorism officials with a fundamental question: do you know the difference between Sunni and Shiite? Is it a gotcha question? Perhaps. But if knowing your enemy is the most basic rule of war, I don't think the question is out of bounds. And as I quickly explained to my subjects, I'm not looking for theological explanations, just the basics. Who is on whose side and what do they want? After all, wouldn't British counterterrorism officials responsible for Northern Ireland, know the difference between a Catholic and a Protestant. Right? An exact parallel. Not by sight, that's true. But so far, most American officials I've interviewed don't have a clue. That includes not just intelligence and law enforcement officials, but also members of Congress who have important roles overseeing our spy agencies. How can they do their jobs if they don't know the basics? He said his curiosity was aroused when he saw a Jon Stewart episode in which they made fun of the seeming ignorance of officials, such as Gary Bald, the FBI's counterterrorism chief, who said such expertise, knowing the difference between Sunni and Shia, isn't as important as being a good manager. So, Jeff Stein said, I thought I'd check out the FBI's temperature once again. At the end of a long interview, I asked Willie Hullen, chief of the Bureau's new National Security Branch, whether he thought it was important for a man of his position to know the difference between the Sunni and the Shiite. Yeah, sure, it's right to know the difference. It's important to know who your targets are. So I asked him to tell me the difference. Well, it's got something to do with their beliefs and who's following them and who they're following. Okay, I said, trying to help. What about today? Which one is Iran, Sunni or Shiite? He thought for a second. I prompted, okay, Iran and Hezbollah, which are they? He took a stab. Sunni. Wrong. Al-Qaeda. Sunni. Right. All right, and to his credit, Mr. Hohmann, a distinguished agent who is up nights worrying about our safety, and he probably is, did at least know that this vicious struggle is driving Iraq into a civil war. I suspect that there might be a few of you who will not be taking the course next semester, next year, for whatever reasons. So I thought that I would do this segment first now, because it's really important. We know the difference between Sunni and Shiite, don't we? Yes, we do, because it's all about Ali. It's all about Ali. That's the basic issue. In other words, should he be the successor to Muhammad or not? That's the basic issue. The first consensus is, should he be the successor? No. Abu Bakr, camel daddy, gets the job. But then, Ali's wife, Fatima, complains. And she says she didn't get the inheritance her father promised her. And Abu Bakr says, never mind, your dad said all the faithful should have it. Oha, that's not good. It's an insult, and it's an injustice. Then Umar, the man who puts Abu Bakr in power, he and his men invade Fatima's house and either intentionally or unintentionally injure her to the point where she dies later. Oha, now it's real. It's no longer just an insult and an injustice. Harm has been committed. In fact, it could be murder. More fuel for the fires of suspicion, the fires of anger, frustration. And then Uthman, the next, a Sunni, is murdered by the supporters of Ali. Oha! And then Ali is murdered by the supporters of Uthman, that is Muawiyah Umayyad. Oha! And then Ali's two sons are murdered by the Umayyad family. Oha! And the fires of hatred get stronger and stronger and stronger. And then the Abbasid family murders the entire Umayyad family. Oha! Each generation finds new reasons to renew old hatreds. And so the divisions between the Sunni and the Shia grow and they grow and they grow. They develop theological differences, which change over time. They develop liturgical ceremonial differences, which change over time. And how are we supposed to know the difference between the Islamic Cain and Abel? The main point: which regions are Shia? And it's really easy to remember. I've put the map on your timeline for your convenience, and it's this map right here. It's really easy to remember. The Shia are Iraq and Iran. Everybody else is Sunni, or a splinter group connected with the Sunni. It's primarily two countries, Iraq and Iran, and everybody else is essentially Sunni. There are, again, many, many fracturings, but this is the basic idea. Now, Iraq is Sunni. Iraq is on the left. It's in yellow. I'm sorry, Iraq is Shia. It's Shia. Iraq is Shia. But Saddam Hussein, as I'm sure many of you know, Saddam Hussein and his ruling party were Sunni. A small Sunni minority ruling a Shia majority. This is not generally a good thing, and it explains a great deal about the mess we call Iraq today. But you see, the reality is it's much more complicated than even Jeff Stein in his New York Times article could suppose. So let me give you an example. We go back to Mr. Mu'awiyah Umayyad, who moves the center of his power from Medina, where Muhammad lived and ruled, to the very ancient, very famous, very prestigious city of Damascus. In its own views, Damascus is one of the oldest cities in the world. A very, very old city and a very powerful city. Damascus is today the capital of which country? Syria. Syria is Sunni. Damascus is the capital of Syria. Do you think that the fact they are an ancient culture has any effect upon the rulers of Syria and the people of Damascus today? The Umayyad dynasty lasts for approximately 100 years. What happens? They get slaughtered, and a Shia family, the Abbasid dynasty, takes over instead. The Abbasid dynasty moves the capital once again. It moves the capital to the city of Baghdad, a new city, the city of Baghdad, which is located between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. In other words, it is in which country today? It's in the country of Iraq. This dynasty lasts for approximately 400 years, and it coincides with the golden age of Islam. Do you think the fact that the Abbasid dynasty ruled for 400 years in Baghdad during the golden age of Islam has any effect upon the people of Iraq today and the people who live in Baghdad today? The most holy cities of Islam are which ones? Mecca and Medina. They are located in Saudi Arabia. Do you think the fact that this country has stewardship over the oldest and holiest Muslim sites have any effect upon the people of Saudi Arabia and the Saudi royal family? Next, Syria is Sunni. Next door is Iraq, it's Shia. But it's more complicated than that. In ancient times, the empires that developed in Iraq, also known as Mesopotamia, often controlled the regions known as Syria. In ancient times, the empires that ruled Syria often controlled Iraq, known as Mesopotamia. What does that mean for these two countries, Syria and Iraq? Long before Islam came, These two countries are very hostile to each other because both rightfully believe that they deserve to rule the other. All this means is that there are deep-seated political and historical rivalries, whoever rules in Syria, whoever rules in Iraq. Syria is Sunni. Saudi Arabia is Sunni. But it's more complicated than that. Syria is a very ancient land. There have been great empires here, very sophisticated cities, long before the Arabs got their act together briefly under Muhammad and conquered Syria. So what does this automatically mean between Syria and Saudi Arabia? They do not like each other. They didn't like each other before Muhammad, and they have another 1,001 reasons not to like each other now. The Saudi Arabians look down on Syria because we have the holy sites. The Syrians look down on the Saudis because they're Arabs, they're barbarians, they're uncouth, they're uncivilized, they're dumb. But there's another very important Sunni player here. On the left, it's Egypt. And it looks down on all of them because this is one of the oldest civilizations in the world, and it has always considered itself to be the wisest civilization in the world. Do you think this has any effect upon the way the Egyptians see themselves today? Both Iraq and Iran are Shia. Is Iraq a young land? No. It's an extremely ancient land. This is where the Sumerian civilization, this phenomenally advanced urban culture, over 5,000 years ago built enormous cities. And then what happened? In this Mesopotamian Iraq region, frequently overrun, the Persians overran it, and many stayed. The Hittites from the west came, many stayed. Greeks with Alexander came, many stayed. Romans came to Iraq, and many stayed. Byzantines came to Iraq, and many stayed. Arabs came from the south, and many stayed. Eventually, Mongols come from the northeast, and many stay. Eventually, Turks come from the northeast, and many stay. What does that tell you about the ethnic makeup of Iraq? It is incredibly complicated, incredibly diverse, and what it actually means is that most people in Iraq can choose their ethnicity because somewhere in their family there's an Arab, somewhere in their family there's a Turk, somewhere in their family there's probably a Greek person in there as well. Do you see? So, is Iran an ancient land? Yes, it is, a very ancient land. Here too, the center of some great civilizations. The Persian civilization under Cyrus and Darius, one of the best run civilizations, one of the best run empires for centuries in the ancient times. Then the Parthian Empire, again, which conquers, of course, Iraq. And then our friends, the Sassanid Empire, which once again conquers Iraq. Do you think the fact that Iran has been the center of an ancient and a series of ancient civilizations have any effect upon the way Iranians see themselves today? So, Iraq and Iran are both Shia. What is their relationship? They do not like each other. In the best of circumstances, they do not like each other. And these do not likes, these mutual animosities, are centuries and centuries and centuries older than the arrival of Islam. So, what I want you to have a sense of here is the incredibly complex, incredibly hostile relationships between these five countries. Egypt, centered in Cairo, Alexandria. Saudi Arabia, centered in Mecca, Medina, Riyadh. Syria, centered in Damascus. Iraq, centered in Baghdad. Iran, centered in Tehran and Isfahan. Each of these is the site of ancient civilizations, with ancient memories of conquest and victory and conquest and defeat. And each has ancient rivalries, hostilities, and animosities. And then 4 of these countries are overrun by Arabs, Muhammad and his successors. The Arabs initially, for a while, were the ruling elite. And many of them stayed. However, today, there are Arabs in all these 4 countries: Egypt, Syria, Iraq, Iran. And the people who live in these countries still see the Arabs as foreigners, in spite of the fact that it's been, 1,500 years. This gives you an idea of what we just gently call geopolitical realities. This is the Middle East. It is inherently unstable. It is inherently, inevitably unstable. This literally proves Thomas Hobbes' theory. The Hobbesian theory, a state of perpetual war. Well, okay, maybe not actual physical war at every given second, but the propensity is always there. It is always there. It is ever present. It takes very little for these countries to be at each other's throats. So, how can we possibly keep all this straight? Well, the reality is we don't have to. Actually, I do have to. But, okay, you don't have to. Because if you want to jog your memory, is Iran Sunni or Shia, all you have to do is Google it. Or you can go to your smartphone, or you can call a friend who has internet, or you can call me. That's all we have to do. Send Dr. Hohmann a message. We don't have to remember it. We don't have to remember these geopolitical realities, but I would suggest that the people who do need to know are our members of Congress, our presidential staff, our intelligence services, and most especially, all those people in our government who make foreign policy and who plan covert operations. It isn't just about Shia and Sunni. It is so much more. And if we don't know the difference between, if our officials, if those who plan covert operations do not know even the difference between Sunni and Shia, then our problems are even worse than we imagine. And our policies are even more catastrophic than they have already become. This is a really dangerous part of the world. So again, I wanted to give this to you now, in case suddenly half the class decides I'm not going to take spring after all. It's too late, I've already said it. Okay, at any rate. So, it's actually, it's not even 1:30, the clock is a little bit fast, but actually I'm not finished, because I have more stories to tell. Thank you very much. All right. So, but before I do, I wanted to point out that on your timeline for today, I've included a very, very small sample reading list. There are many famous historians of Islam, historians of British or American, German traditions, as well as Muslim traditions. I've just given you one of each type, again, in this reading list. And you will notice that I've included an edition of the Islamic holy book, again, the Quran. It's a paperback. I took it with me to the pool. As I was reading it, I thought, oh, I shouldn't be doing this at the pool. I only have a bathing suit on. And then I noticed the man next to me was from Iraq. This was a really embarrassed conversation. At any rate, there are always students who are interested in reading the Quran or taking a stab at it, taking a brief little, afternoon jaunt just to check it out. So if you are interested in reading the Quran or just parts of it, just getting a taste of it, I would like to make just two brief comments. First off, the edition that I have shown you, the edition that's on the picture above me, the edition that is on the timeline, I have chosen for a reason. This Quran is a new translation by a man named Abdel Halim for Oxford University. Oxford University is, of course, one of the most prestigious, one of the most reliable publishing companies in the world when it comes to academic things. Halim was born in Egypt. He had already learned the Quran by heart, which is no small feat, it's relatively large. He had learned the Quran by heart as a child. He was educated in Cairo and then at Cambridge. He has taught Arabic at Cambridge and at the University of London. He is now professor of Islamic Studies at the School of Oriental Studies at the University of London. 2008, he also received the Medal of the Order of the British Empire. The reason why I chose him is because here you have a man, a highly educated Muslim, and a professor in England who is comfortable and familiar with both worlds, the world of traditional Islam and the world of Western modernity. He is the ideal man because he understands both worlds. His presentation, I should say, is favorable to the Quran, which is a good thing. If you're going to read it, you want to read it interpreted by somebody who takes it seriously. Otherwise, what's the point? The second point is, like all religious texts, it's difficult to read. For starters, you have to understand that the way it's presented, the author comes from above in its own self-understanding. The Quran describes itself as being sent down from God, and the expression sent down is used over 200 times in the text. In other words, as you read it, you get the impression that the origin of the Quran is from outside the work. The author talks to the prophet, or he talks about the prophet, or he talks to other people, or he talks about events. Muhammad himself never speaks. Muhammad himself never comments. He is completely passive and often significantly absent. This brings us to a very important stylistic feature. God speaks directly to his people in this text, and he uses we. It's the royal we. We're familiar with this from the British Empire, right? It's the royal we. Okay. Then there are dialogues between God and the prophets. There are dialogues between King Solomon and his servants. The key to reading this is to be aware of the shift of pronouns, just like in the Jewish Torah, just like in the epistles of St. Paul. You have to be very aware of the shift in pronouns. A verse may begin by talking about God in the third person. Then God speaks directly because suddenly the pronoun is we. Then God commands Muhammad to do something. And so suddenly the next verse begins with say. That's a command to Muhammad to say something. Do you see? In other words, the key is the shift in pronouns. And finally, it's a religious text. It is very repetitive. It is very repetitive. Did I mention it's very repetitive? Okay? It is in some ways like the Jewish Torah. It is in some ways like some epistles of St. Paul, right? Over and over and over again. It's not only, of course, to encourage and to discourage, depending upon what you're doing, but also because it's the great way to memorize. It's the great way to memorize. The circular looping argumentation. Again, this edition of the Quran has a wonderful introduction that explains all of this and explains very much more. So, deep breath. Thank you. All right. We're going to go to where we left off last week, because I have, as I mentioned, a few more stories to tell. We're going to go back to the Abbasid dynasty, and you recall by this time they have a preference for not just thousands of concubines and lots of alcoholic beverages at their parties, and not just young teenaged boys as well. They have a preference for Turkish soldiers, or basically what we call Turkic soldiers. Because why? They are awesome fighters. And once again, they are what? They are nomadic peoples. People, again, nomads who were converted in Central Asia, one way or another, probably a combination of war and alliance, as is always the case, war and negotiation. And these Turks are then used, these Turkic peoples are used as mercenary and soldiers. And they are brought into the Abbasid dynasty, brought into the Abbasid lands, and then they go rogue for logical reasons. Because the Abbasid rulers are interested in wine, women, boys, and song, all right? And the Turks are interested in fighting, because that's what nomadic people do. Exactly, very good. And so these Turkic people begin to attack some of the other Muslim governors and take over their positions. Then they take over some more lands. And one of the major groups is the Seljuk Turks that are organized by a man named Togrul Beg. He besieges Baghdad. Now notice he is Muslim, and he is attacking a Muslim capital, essentially. He captures it, and then he takes the title of Sultan. Sultan is easily translated as prince, and why does he do this? Because there is still a caliph. It's the Abbasid caliph of this particular time. And he doesn't really want to overthrow him because he is, after all, the head of the Islamic religion. But what this means is that the power has devolved. The power has devolved to him, to his armies, to all the men that he's put into other major positions of provinces. The caliph still exists, but what function does the caliph now have? It's entirely ceremonial. You see, it's entirely ceremonial. In other words, the Seljuks have created a huge empire. They have basically sort of blended in and taken over much of this Abbasid world, as you can see here in this large green. And then under the grandson, Malik Shah. Malik, who attacks and takes over the Levant, that is, the Holy Land. Now notice, who does he fight? Muslim rulers. Who does he overthrow? Muslim rulers. Who does he kill? Muslim soldiers. Again, it's Muslim on Muslim violence. This Muslim on violence has, of course, already existed for a very long time. There was also one other story that I wanted to bring back to your mind because, again, I need to reference it again after the break. But you recall that it is this group of people that ignites the Crusades. The attempt by the Europeans to bring the Holy Land back under European control because the Seljuk Turks stop Christian pilgrimages to the Holy Land, which by now are actually very important for Christians. Many Christian churches are destroyed. Many Christians are killed. And so the Crusades, again, are inaugurated through this. Now, the Crusaders, however, soon are terrified by an old man. And for us who are old, this is very gratifying. Okay. He is known as the Old Man of the Mountain. It first came into modern consciousness through Marco Polo, because Marco Polo writes about this. Marco Polo, again, a very well-traveled, very intelligent man. And he writes about this Old Man of the Mountain. Remember that he has a castle in the mountains which we today identify as the mountains of Afghanistan. Again, the castle commands a valley. Behind the castle, hidden, is a great garden. He brings young men to the castle to teach them the Quran, again, to help them to memorize and learn and understand, again, from the commentaries, for example. And then he drugs some of these men, young men, puts them in the garden where they experience the delights of paradise, women, song, and wine. How can you not like that kind of paradise? Anyway, sorry. Wrong, okay. And then, after a few days of luxuriating in these sensual pleasures, they're drugged again, brought back into the castle, and they're not happy. And then he tells them, a man, a ruler, a businessman, someone he once murdered, and he says, you may die, but if you die, don't worry, you'll be back in this beautiful, wonderful paradise once again. Again, they were known as the Hashashin, because, again, they were drugged through hashish. And from this we get the word assassins. Again, the word assassins. All right. So again, the assassins actually also kind of, take their shots at the Crusaders on occasion. But this brings us to, once more, again, just a brief look. Again, remember these crusades, there are about 9 major crusades. The first one is successful. Again, the first crusade is the one that invades the Levant. Again, it takes the Muslims, the Seljuk Turks, completely by surprise. And again, in the mindset of the time, this feudal system, again, these Latin-speaking, again, Western European crusaders established what become known as the Latin kingdoms because they speak Latin as opposed to the Greek of the Byzantines. And these crusaders identified again by a cross with a tunic. Again, they are pilgrims, so to speak. They're military pilgrims, and they're going on military pilgrimages. If this is what a military pilgrimage looks like, I would not like to go on it. Thank you. All right. So again, we have here these Latin kingdoms. I wanted to just highlight one more time. Again, he's on your timeline, Mr. Saladin. Saladin is the most famous Muslim ruler, essentially, in the Western world, certainly from the Middle Ages. By the time of, again, after the First Crusade is over, the Muslim forces are in disarray, and it's the right opportunity for a man that one would never have thought would actually take this opportunity. He was born in Mesopotamia, that is, he was born in the Iraq regions to a Kurdish family. Again, they're related to the Persians. But his father works for the Turkish governor in Syria, and so he grows up in Damascus. He loves religion, he loves to read the Quran, he loves to study, he has a great taste for it, and he doesn't seem to be much of a fighter, and then he gets sucked in because he joins the staff of an uncle who gets involved in this very powerful 3-way struggle, which I'm not even going to describe to you. But the point of it is that Saladin finds his second calling. His first calling is being a scholar, and his second calling is that he's actually a phenomenal general. And he's a phenomenal general not only for his strategies, but because he can bring people together. He is sent by his uncle to Egypt, and Saladin comes to Egypt. He realizes that this state, this kingdom, this region is in a great state of collapse. He doesn't want Egypt to fall to the Crusaders, so he overthrows the Caliph of Egypt and proclaims himself Caliph instead. That's actually very useful. Again, a man of great learning, a man of great education, and he takes it in his mind to drive the Crusaders out. His great accomplishment is being able, again, to bring many, again, the Muslims tend to disunity. The Muslims tend to fight each other. And he is able to bring all these groups together, and they attack these Latin kingdoms. Within 6 months, they have captured Jerusalem. They have captured many of these Latin kingdoms. Now, in this medieval world, again, this time period of the 1100s, again, the 12th century, the 1100s, Saladin's reputation grows far and wide. And it grows not only amongst Muslims, but also amongst Christians, because he is a deeply religious man, and he lives his faith. He is extremely generous to his allies, he is generous to his enemies. He becomes a model of Muslim chivalry. And when he captures Jerusalem, this sparks the Third Crusade, which is led in part by Richard the Lionheart, who becomes an epitome, a model of Christian chivalry. And so this is a very interesting fight. 2 men, heroic, charismatic, great generals, and great gentlemen. The Third Crusade is a total disaster. I could go into this, but the clock won't let me. It's a great disaster. It accomplishes nothing except killing lots and lots and lots of people. But it brings Saladin and Richard the Lionheart together, and they make an arrangement. They agree that Saladin can keep control over Jerusalem, and Saladin agrees that the Europeans can come on pilgrimages and be left alone. And that's pretty much all they actually wanted. Shortly thereafter, Saladin returns to Damascus, and then he dies. Boom. He's 56. Even at that time, there were a lot of people that were much older than this. He was basically just worn out. But he remains a memory for the Crusaders, because even though he was their enemy, they revered and admired, and many of them loved him. And indeed, it is very interesting because the Crusades bring much of the Muslim world to Europe, because sometimes you admire your enemies. And if you admire your enemies, you can learn from them. When he died, his friends discovered that he didn't have a penny to his name. He'd given it all away. And so his friends gathered money so that they could build a tomb for him in Damascus, which you can still visit today. So if you go to Damascus, it's a little tricky, but that's okay. Okay, if you go to Damascus, all right, this is one of the sites you will see. Next semester, we actually will go vicariously to Damascus. You're going to find it very interesting. It's quite a remarkable city. There are, as you see, several more crusades. The Fourth Crusade, I just want to mention very quickly. You'll see that it's led by the Republic of Venice. Venice is an increasingly powerful city. You know, remember, Venice, it's the city built on water. How amazing is that? Thank you, very good. So again, it's technically the fourth, let me just say this very quickly. Okay. The Fourth Crusade is organized by Venice. The Crusader Knights, thousands of them, think they're going to the Holy Land. But Venice hijacks the crusade. They sail to Constantinople, they get involved in the power struggle, and they capture the city of Constantinople. This is a disaster for Byzantium. So I thought I'd mention that. Okay. Then we have Children's Crusade, 5 through 9. 1291, about 100 years after Saladin's death. The fall of Acre, again, is the very last region that the Christians had under control. In other words, by 1300, the Christians have lost all military and political control over the Holy Land. 200 years of fighting, and what was there to show for it? Well, lots of graves. Lots of graves. So, this brings us to another group of nomadic people, far away in the east. And they're known as the Mongols, organized by Genghis Khan, who once when asked, "Why do you do what you do?" which is burn cities and conquer areas, he says, "Man's greatest, highest joy is in victory, to conquer one's enemies, to make their loved ones weep, to ride their horses, and to embrace their wives and daughters." And Genghis Khan sweeps into this caliphate. He, his sons, and his grandsons. And then they attack Baghdad. They attack Baghdad, they capture it, they destroy it, and they kill the entire Abbasid family. Except one, who again gets away to Egypt. But again, the entire family is extinguished, which means that with the invasion of the Mongols, the caliphate ceases to exist as an empire. There are now little caliphs all over the place. Is the vision of bringing back the great caliphate empire ever a thought that reoccurs? All the time, including now in 2015. And then the Mongols discover something else. as they're moving through this caliphate, what do they begin to encounter? Assassins. Assassins. Hit-and-run attacks. Great leaders felled all of a sudden. And the Mongols, are they suddenly afraid? Oh no. Here we go after the break. Thank you very much. All right. All right. Hello, hello, hello. Well, into every timeline a little rain must fall, because several observant students have pointed out that the Quran book I have so highly prized is not on the timeline. It's not in the bibliography. I am so sorry. It just got dropped off. So, the author's name is Halim. H-A-L-E-E-N. There are not many Halims who've done a recent translation of the Quran. So again, his name is Halim, H-A-L-E-E-N. And if you would like to email me, I can send you some more information on that as well. All right, so the Mongols. The Mongols, let's see, yes, okay, very good. There we go, okay. Burning and pillaging, yes, they go, thank you. All right, so the Mongols. I want to make one more important point. When nomadic tribes like the Mongols or others attack, they are always a minority. It's always a relatively small group compared to the often very populous civilizations that they invade. It's important to understand, again, for us, nomadic people, they're kind of smelly because they never bathe, right? But it's important to understand that up until the invention of the gun, nomadic tribes were always the militarily superior force. This is one of the reasons why they were able to conquer so much, when they put their minds to it and got their act together, right? If they couldn't get their act together, the cities were safe. But at any rate, so the Muslims, again, they invade these Central Asian regions. Again, they move out into this former caliphate region. And I just want to point out that in Persia and the region north of Persia, which was called Khorasan, there were these really sophisticated underground irrigation systems, which had for centuries and centuries provided tremendous agriculture for this region. If you want to bring a city or a region to its knees, what do you destroy? Today, you turn off the electricity. I mean, can you imagine if our electric generators were bombed? Can you imagine what life is like in San Francisco without any electricity? So in these days, you destroy the water systems. And so in Iraq, for example, there were still Sumerian irrigation networks that were functioning, and the Mongols destroyed those too, with the result that historians say that these regions, Khorasan, Central Asia, Iran, Iraq, have never really recovered from this, because their agriculture was so thoroughly destroyed that desertification began to develop. Do you see? Again, if you see pictures of the area around Baghdad, it looks so desolate. It's so hard to imagine this was an incredibly verdant region at one time. And not that long ago. Again, the Muslims did enormous, enormous damage. But at any rate, so the Mongols now find themselves under attack from the assassins. Thank you, very, very good. All right. And so the Mongols, after all, this is kind of fun. A real opponent, not wimpy cities. It's like real opponents. So let's give it a try. So once again, at this time, the old man of the mountain is in the hills of Afghanistan, and they are galvanized. Again, the Muslims, one more time, the Mongols are galvanized into action. They find this palace. At this time, it's called the Nine Fortresses, which means it's a much more sophisticated area. And what do? They surround it. The Mongols surround it and they lay siege to it. 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. Anyone trying to get in is killed. Anyone trying to get out is killed. No food, nothing comes in. After 3 years, a message comes from the citadel. We will surrender. The Mongols say to them, please do. We'll be nice to you. So they say they surrender, and the Mongols kill every single person they can find. And so the old man of the mountain disappeared for a while. I have to tell you, in all honesty, we will never forget this. We will always remember where we were when we first heard these horrifying, horrifying pictures. And I will tell you, the first thought was incredible. I just couldn't believe it. I mean, again, like most of us, I think we just couldn't believe it. But I will tell you in all honesty, my second thought was, the old man of the mountain is back. The old man of the mountain is back in his newest incarnation. Now, Osama bin Laden wasn't that old. But he was, at that time, if I remember correctly, in the mountains of Afghanistan. I don't think he had a castle, but he had an enormously well-fortified area. And I don't think he had a garden with girls and music and little rivers of wine, because young men today are not seduced by that. I think the seduction that Osama bin Laden provided was laptops, computers, weapons, training, and a cause. And that's what intoxicates young men today. He was the old man of the mountain for our time, and I think there are more coming. All right, so that was fun. Okay. At any rate, so the caliphate has been shattered, Muslims versus Muslims. Yes, thank you. All right, now, the Mongols also established an enormous empire. It's called the Mongol Empire. All right. But you'll notice again that it encompasses an enormous region. It encompasses a huge, huge region. And inevitably, it breaks apart. And why does it break apart? Again, it's called the Mongol rulers were called Khans. And so it's called the 4 Khanates. And the reason why they break apart is because, once again, the culture absorbs these conquerors, and the cultures pull them apart again: Chinese, Persian, Russian, and Central Asia. And then, don't go away. Here we go. When I was young, one of the many places that sounded so intriguing to me was Samarkand. Tashkent, Fergana. I mean, they sounded so mysterious and they sounded so exotic. I didn't even know where they were, which was kind of cool. I made the mystery even better. And every once in a while, the teacher would mention a city like this, and it didn't shed any light. It just made it all more mysterious. Magical. Samarkand. Once upon a time, a long, long time ago, there was a great king who ruled over a great caravan city in the great lands of what we today call Central Asia. He had a daughter, Kanda, whom he greatly loved. He loved her beauty, he loved her intelligence, he loved her graciousness, he loved her cheerful, seemingly endless energy, and he wanted only what was best for her. And pretty much nothing was good enough for his daughter. In that city, there also lived a young man, born into great poverty. But people noticed him, not just because he was handsome, but because he was strong, he was courageous, he was honest. And his name was Samar. One day, the king's daughter, Princess Kanda, was walking along the edges of the great palace gardens, near where the gardens border on the edges of the city, and she saw Samar, who was also walking along the edges of the city. And so they talked, and they found delight and happiness in each other's company, and they agreed to meet again the next day in the same place. And so over that wonderful long summer, they met every day, they talked, they laughed, they shared stories, they shared comfortable silences. And each day they grew to love each other more and more and more. And one day, Kanda tells her father, she tells her father, I've met the young man that I want to marry because we're so very, very much in love. We are so very, very much in love. And her father was horrified. He was appalled. Marry a common man, a poor boy who has no prospects, no family connections? It's out of the question. But his daughter persisted, and she cried, and she implored, and finally her father sent her back to her chambers. Then the father had Samar brought before him and had him killed. When a servant ran to tell Princess Kanda, the young princess collapsed in grief. And then, after a long time of crying and crying and crying, she walked up the great palace stairs, up the great palace towers, to the tallest of the towers, threw herself out, and died. The people of the city were stricken with grief. And so, to honor these two lovers, the people of the city changed the name of the city to honor these two lovers, Samarkand. Don't we all love a good love story? But this is the story they tell in Samarkand. Samarkand, again, a very, very ancient city, long before the Silk Road began to weave its way through these mountains. There are some very, very ancient remnants of some very, very ancient civilizations. Samarkand eventually, of course, links. It becomes an anchor for the Silk Road, and rich, it becomes famous. And then, of course, boom, along come the Mongols. They do their damage. Yep. But they adopt Islam. They adopt the Turkic language for a time. And then, as the Mongol realm fractures, the chaos that results is exploited by a young man named Tamerlane. He's Mongol, he's Turkic, and he's Muslim. In other words, he belongs to this Mongol-Turkic warrior aristocracy. Now, Tamerlane, another exotic, mysterious name, right? I mean, we've all heard Tamerlane. You always wonder, well, where does he belong? Christopher Marlowe wondered, and so he invented a story. Edgar Allan Poe wondered as well, and he wrote about Tamerlane as well. So who was Tamerlane? Well, he was born near Samarkand. The story is that when he was born, he had blood in his palm, the palm of his hands. Again, as in all cultures, there's always someone present at the birth to give a prophecy of that child's life. And so the prophecy of this child was that one day he would create a great empire. And it turns out that from his childhood, he was an excellent horse rider. He was an excellent rider. He was very skilled in swordsmanship and in archery. And he attracted a very loyal following of warriors. His ambition grew. He became tribal chief. Then he married the widow of a Mongol Khan. He became a royal son-in-law. And as his adventures grew, there was a hiccup because he got caught in an ambush and he took arrows in his right arm and in his right leg. And given the sophistication of medicine out in the middle of nowhere, it left him permanently limping and not the entire use of his arm anymore. And so from this he became known as Timur-i-Leng, which means Timur the Lame. You can always count on your friends to give you a really unpleasant name. All right, so just to look ahead 20 years, just very, very quickly, just to look ahead 20 years. 20 years later, he found the man that had actually clobbered him with these arrows. And so he captured this man and he decided to use the man as live target practice. In other words, he was going to do as much damage for as long as possible. An arrow through the arm, an arrow through the eye, an arrow through the stomach. You see, postpone that death and make it really, really hard on him. At any rate, Timur-i-Leng, Tamerlane, ruled over an increasingly large region, and notice the city he makes as his capital. It is the city of Samarkand. Right. He received the title Conqueror of the World in 1370, which only fueled his ambition because he said, as there is only one God in heaven, there should be only one king on earth. That's actually really great. So, isn't that good for your resume? Thank you. So, over the next 35 years, he personally led mounted archers as far away as Moscow and Delhi in India. Some historians maintain this is the largest region ever conquered by a single ruler. Brilliant strategist, loyal, highly mobile troops, overcame all opposition, again, and brutal on an unprecedented scale. Historians believe that he and his armies killed over 17 million people. Pyramids of skulls surpassed even the brutality of the Mongols. And it is said that still today, fossilized bones appear as they till the soil. He sacked cities from Persia to India to Russia, carted back hundreds of thousands of slaves, craftsmen, immense treasures, all invested in the city of Samarkand. For example, in 1383, the city of Isfizar in Persia was troublesome. So he attacked the city, rounded up 2,000 citizens, and then piled them alive and cemented them into clay towers. We have several clay towers built under Tamerlane, which we suspect harbor in them victims who were alive when it was built. 1398, he attacks the Delhi Sultanate. Again, this now becomes a common term. A sultan is a Muslim prince. The region you rule is a sultanate. So he attacks the Delhi Sultanate, crossing the Indus River. His invasion of India, too, is marked by systematic slaughter and atrocities on a truly massive scale. He says he wants to destroy the Hindu religion. Actually, what he really wants to do is basically just conquer stuff, because the Delhi Sultanate is not Hindu, it's Muslim, but whatever. At any rate, so he attacks the great city of Delhi, and he has already by this time accumulated about 100,000 captives. He's afraid they're going to get in the way, so he has them all killed. The Sultan of Delhi has war elephants. They wear chainmail and they have poison on their tusks. That's a dangerous enemy. And so naturally, Tamerlane's armies were suddenly a little hesitant about matching themselves with those elephants. So Tamerlane came, again, he's a brilliant strategist, he came up on a really brilliant idea. He had his men load down camels with as much hay and wood as they could carry. Then when the war elephants charged his army, Tamerlane ordered the hay on the camels to be set on fire. The camels were prodded in the right direction with iron bars, causing the camels to charge at the elephants, screaming in pain. Faced with camels charging at them with flames leaping from their backs, the elephants panicked, turned, and trampled their own soldiers to death. Tamerlane easily captured the city, promptly killed 100,000 people, and took back 10,000 more to Samarkand. Eventually, he attacks Baghdad, of course. We'll just stop right there. He just attacks Baghdad. Bad things happen. Then he goes in the opposite. He actually just kind of crisscrosses back and forth, back and forth. He then decides to take on the Ottomans, a new group of people who are planning on attacking the city of Constantinople. I'm sorry, sorry, ladies and gentlemen, this is going to have to wait, because here comes Tamerlane. And Tamerlane, again, attacks into, you'll see it right here. This is Tamerlane's empire. Again, you see Baghdad very prominently. Then he follows up, again, attacks what becomes the Ottoman Empire. And he captures, oh, this is so good, he captures the Ottoman Sultan himself, Bayezid the Thunderbolt. Oh, this is, this is too good. This is too good, seriously. We got the Thunderbolt, yes. And so Tamerlane builds for the Ottoman Sultan a birdcage made out of gold, in which he could then display this new prize. Once Bayezid was inside, Tamerlane brought Bayezid's wife. We won't say what he did to Bayezid's wife, but Bayezid was only briefly locked up in this golden cage because he smashed his head against the cage over and over and over again until he cracked his skull and died. These are wonderful times, all right. I have so many more stories to tell you, but I think you've gotten the basic gist of all of this, okay. At any rate, eventually, Tamerlane returns to Samarkand, and he spends 9 months partying, but actually he's actually getting ready for another invasion. And then we have another interesting story. Because Tamerlane, of course, this is very typically, has several wives. Again, it's for alliances, and he has a princess by the name of Bibi Khanum, exactly, very good. So she thought, in Samarkand, I'll surprise my Tamerlane. I will build a beautiful tower next to the mosque, a minaret essentially. It'll be the most beautiful minaret yet. And the architect is a young man, and this architect falls in love with her. And so she hears that Tamerlane is coming, and she says, hurry, finish, so I can give him the finished present. And he says, nope, I'm not going to finish it unless you let me give you a kiss. And she says, no, you don't know my husband. and she says, all women are the same. Take one of my slave girls. Look at this dish of colored eggs, every shade of the rainbow, yet break open the shell and all difference disappears. And he says, filling 2 bowls, one with water, one with wine, he says, yes, look, the color and the shape is the same, but one leaves me cold, one leaves me intoxicated. And so fearful that Tamerlane is going to arrive before the tower is finished, she allows him to kiss her on the cheek, except his passion leaves a mark. And then Tamerlane arrives. She's trying to keep a profile. Look at the tower, honey. And he does. And then he embraces her and he sees the mark. And he says, oh, honey, it's all right. Let's go to the top and take a look. So they went to the top and he pushed her out. And then, according to the Samarkand story, he goes after that little architect, that young architect who's basically trying to get out of town, hunts him down. The architect himself also runs up a tower, and then as his men are about to get him, the architect flies away. I don't really know what to make of that either, but that's the way the story goes. Okay, at any rate. So, Tamerlane, 9 months in Samarkand because he's now going to take on whom? Ming China. He's going to take on the Emperor Yongle, the one who organized the encyclopedia, the one who moved to Beijing, the one who built the Forbidden City. Tamerlane doesn't call him Yongle, he calls him King Pig. King Pig. Did Yongle know Tamerlane is coming? Yes, he did. They're building walls like crazy for the cities that are closest, but the attack upon China never comes because Tamerlane dies. His body, embalmed with musk and rose water, wrapped in linen, is laid in Samarkand. Again, it's estimated that he killed 17 million people. So let me show you Samarkand today. This is called the Registan. This was built by Tamerlane. Actually, it was built by hundreds of thousands of craftsmen from all over the known world. India, Persia, Moscow. It is today no longer a city on its own. It belongs to a much larger, very wealthy country. And therefore, as you can see, it's been, here we go, it's been renovated. It was called the Jewel of Central Asia, and it is, without question, a jewel. It is, without question, a jewel. Again, this is Samarkand. Samarkand. The great Registan. So let me ask you this. Are the people of Samarkand proud of him? Of course. One people's glory is another people's nightmare. That is often the case in history. Again, the great Registan. And because, again, I like to tell stories, I thought I would just turn to the question, what turns a man into a monster? Ironically, it wasn't Christopher Marlowe that dealt with that. It wasn't Nicholas Rowe. It was Edgar Allan Poe. The poem is a difficult read for my students at the conservatory. I like to call it English as a foreign language. Because, in all honesty, modern English today in the United States has become very primitive. Our students can no longer read 19th century English. They just don't have the patience to work their way through it. It is so tragic. But at any rate, Edgar Allan Poe suggests that Tamerlane was inspired as an impressionable young teenager to become a great hero to impress the woman he loved. And there are some wonderful lyric passages about love in this poem. For example, my passions usurped a tyranny then, in my boyhood, when their fire burned with a still intenser glow, for passion must with youth expire. I have no words, alas, to tell the loveliness of loving well. And she would mark the opening skies at dawn. I saw no heaven but in her eyes, for passionate love is still divine. And so again, he hopes to impress her, and he says, I pictured in my fancy's eye, that is, I pictured in my imagination, her silent, deep astonishment, when a few fleeting years gone by, she might recall in him whom fame had gilded with a conqueror's name. And so he rides away to conquer the world for this woman that he loves. And Poe writes, "Power spread its quiet venom. Power its venom secretly imparts. Nothing have I now in common with human hearts." And Poe writes about Samarkand, again, as Tamerlane talking about his city, he says, "Look round thee now on Samarkand. Is she not queen of earth, her pride above all cities, in her hand their destinies? With all beside of glory which the world hath known, stands she not proudly and alone? And who is her sovereign? Timur is, he whom the astonished earth has seen, with victory on victory re-echoing great Genghis Khan's fame." After many years, grisly years, half-hearted, dulled by slaughter, his soul emptied by war, disguised, Tamerlane returns to what was once his home. And he finds that the woman he had so deeply, so truly, so deeply loved had died a very long time ago. What was there left for me now? A kingdom won for a broken heart. Edgar Allan Poe. All right. So, it was, I'm just going to spool ahead here a little bit, okay? Boop, boop, boop. Thank you, there we go. So, these cities, Samarkand, Tashkent, Burgana, Fergana, all these regions, are today in a country known as Uzbekistan, a country immensely wealthy in virtually every possible natural resource you can imagine. This is one of the reasons why they can afford, for example, to resurrect not only Samarkand, but build some very, very, this is Tashkent. Tashkent is an amazing city. At any rate, it is one of Tamerlane's descendants whose name is Babur. Not Barbar, everyone's favorite elephant, but Babur. Babur makes his capital in the city of Kabul in Afghanistan. It was, in his time, the city of gardens. If you've seen pictures of Kabul today, that's really hard to imagine. And from Kabul, Babur now invades India to establish one of the most splendid and famous dynasties in India's history. He also thereby establishes the foundation. He establishes the foundation of the great nightmares which now beset India. Far to the west, the Ottomans begin their assault upon the city of Constantinople, a city that has defended itself for 700 years. For 700 years, the walls have protected this city. And now, once again, the great walls are asked to do their work. Will they hold? Of course they will hold, but then a completely unexpected development. These are the two stories we will follow when we meet again in January. Anyway. Wait. I'm not through. I wanted to thank all of you for being here. I wanted to thank you for being so gracious, so patient, your constant kindness, your generosity, sending me messages, suggestions. I'm very, very grateful for all this. It is such a treat. It is such an honor to teach here, and I cannot tell you how much I love doing this. So thank you all very, very much. Have a wonderful November. Have a wonderful holiday season. I wish you and your families a joyful holiday season and all the very, very best of health and happiness in the new year. Thank you again very, very much.